We're back for another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. Today is just going to be Corinne and I talking and recapping and just sharing our thoughts from 2021 and our hopes for 2022. Corinne, welcome.
Hello, we're so glad you're joining us today. I reached out to Gary and I said, I think the last episode of 2021 should be a recap and just something fun. We don't get to talk just the two of us very often. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, same here. Same here. We've had some amazing guests in 2021 and just a lot of different perspectives on different topics. And so what are your thoughts on some of the guests we've had, Corinne?
Well, I guess I first want to start with you. I remember talking about this podcast and just meeting you years ago. And during the beginning months of COVID, I think we started talking about it and we'd go back and forth. We'd have a few meetings and decide. And I just appreciate you, Gary, that you kind of put, like, I wouldn't say push me into it, but so much of my life is so calculated and measured. And I don't think I take a lot of risks, which might be one of those connections we make later about how educators tend to be maybe slow with change. And then you're in the business world. And so you're like, come on, let's do it. And so I appreciate you first. I want to say that. I think I've just enjoyed how our guests, it just has been a natural conversation. And I feel like I've learned so much and grown. I use a hashtag sometimes called Corey Bell Learns. And I feel like I've learned a lot this year. And probably most of all of not being so worried, just start the conversation with great guests. They all have such passion for public education and students. And so I think that's what I've learned the most, is just to go with it and to trust those relationships and those friendships that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been exciting. It's definitely been exciting visiting with you on the podcast, Corinne, and of course the guests that we've had on. And yeah, from a risk standpoint, when I started working with the education market, now, granted, over the past 15 years, off and on, there's been some touch points throughout my career, but to really just go all in, focused on the education market, it's been an eye-opening experience, really. Mm-hmm. And so when I joined this faith-based company as a way to give back, I thought it was going to be easy, right? I thought it's like, we are giving money to school districts and they don't spend a dime to get it. Now we create a vehicle to do that in its energy savings, but I never knew the hurdles that I would face to give money to the students. Because before I jumped in, both feet forward, you would hear about the education market or the education in general, public education, and the needs that are out there, right? Mm-hmm. And so I expected open arms with this funding mechanism, because in the business world, this would be executives and business owners would be all, and there are some cases where we've worked with businesses outside of Texas, and it's a very, very interesting, I don't know if culture is the right way, or environment of the business world versus public education, which is kind of, it's interesting because we are preparing students to go into the business world. Mm-hmm. So you think there would be a stronger correlation there of that mindset, that business mindset, and everybody sees things through a different lens. So I'm coming in from a different angle than a lot of other people, but my heart was is in the right place to give to students and teachers and to help these school districts. And so that was eye-opening for me, but that was the risk I took of, okay, I'm going to leave this Fortune 100 company and I'm going to go and join a faith-based company and give back. And so it's been an interesting year for me.
Well, and I think on an earlier podcast this year, we talked about the amount of time that would have taken to make such a big change in public ed, where we provided internet, and some districts are providing internet and 1-to-1 ratio iPads and technology. We had to go virtual, like overnight, basically. And I think in the past, I forget what guest or what episode, we talked about how that would have taken 10 years normally, like to do something of that magnitude, but yet we did it. Our teachers did it. our superintendents and people had to make very quick decisions, and it wasn't easy as a school board member and someone in public ed. It wasn't easy at all, but we did it. And so I keep wondering, like, when I think of like the last year and how we've had different guests on, what can we do different in 2022? You know, like because we have to take these risks. Our students are worth those risks. And so yeah, it's I'm glad we both took the risk, but I think there's more to do. You know, there's so much more to do. But
Yeah, I mean, me personally, there's got to be a sense of urgency for innovation. And I know with businesses, you have to meet a certain profit or growth goals. Like you have to meet those goals. And if not, you go out of business, you lose to the competition. And I mean, even with the transition to online learning, that technology has been around for a while.
right.
And I was talking to someone in that space, and they had been approaching school districts. And yeah, my other comment here in a little bit is that you can't put out all districts in a box, but he was approaching districts for years before the pandemic to do something online, and some districts were ready. Some districts have pivoted earlier on, so they weren't scrambling. But I think if there's not a sense of urgency for innovation, and if districts, not all districts, but if some of them if they just keep with the status quo of what's been going on, following that whatever process they've had for the past years without that urgency for innovation. I mean, it was a pandemic this time. What is it going to be next time? And yeah.
Well, I think my concern is that the sense of urgency was there, and I don't want us to lose it, because in my TEDx talk, I talked about that quote from Arundhati Roy that says pandemics are a portal. They can be seen historically. They've been a portal for a new world, a new change. And I agree with you. That sense of urgency has to say. I think we have to meet the needs. I think there are a lot of I mean, I think there are needs that we don't even know what they are yet. Like I don't know that we even have words for some of the needs that are going to happen with social emotional learning. But as far as innovation and technology, it is there. Yeah, there's got to be a deeper sense. We have to keep that consistent urgency there. I think we could just go back to the old ways, and that wasn't working. You know, I mean, people were stressed out. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed is people are so stressed, and I think other people are realizing like life is too short to be that stressed. And that phrase of you only live once, it's no, you only die once. We live every day, and we've got students who are watching us. And so I think that's like the other thing that the thing of 2021 that just keeps resonating in my mind is that our students are watching us. They are looking for leaders. And we've got to stop some of this political fighting and making things so difficult, and just get back to the basics of what do our kids need. So yeah, thinking of that, like, what do you think one of the biggest stressors of 2021 was for you? We'll get to some positive things in a minute, but personally, like, what was one of your biggest stressors of 2021?
Well, just to piggyback off what I mentioned earlier, that was probably the biggest stressor when you go wholeheartedly into that giving mode of wanting to give back and help people, and it's rejected, not by all, but by a lot. We did some amazing things, and we've probably gave more funding in 2021 than any other year. But out of 1,000+ districts in Texas, there was a lot. That was the biggest struggle. I mean, it's like, if you're approaching a family or friend and you have a gift for them and you want to give them a gift and they just reject it, right? It's just, but at the same time, they're asking for that gift, right? But you just didn't package it in the way they wanted it. So it's that was a struggle for me, and just the rejection of that, I guess I'm in somewhat of a sales role because I'm reaching out to people that don't know me, and, I'm meeting them and setting up meetings with them. So it's to be expected, because a lot of people aren't as open to meeting people they don't know, I guess. But so that was probably the biggest challenge, I would say, outside of the pandemic. Of course, there's the fear associated with that. But I do want to say that not all of the districts are the same either. And that was an eye-opening experience, because I went in thinking, okay, this is school districts. And so they're all different, though. They all have different perspectives. Just look at some of the things like masks and no mask, and different protocols related to the virus. So that was probably the biggest challenge. How about you, Corinne? What was the biggest challenge?
Oh, well, probably grad school, and the balancing of it all. Same kind of the same thing. I go as a school board trustee. I go into it with this heart of wanting to give back and wanting to help govern and help provide leadership. But seeing teachers struggling so much and seeing students struggling so much and having to fight just each day seemed like such a battle. So I wish I had a way to make it better. But I guess just continuing to do the work is my way of helping. But yeah, I think it's just the balancing of it all. Definitely snowvid when we didn't have power. That would have been like a week, kind of like if I knew that I wasn't going to have power and water for almost a week, and knew that, like, I thought, oh, I'll do my homework, I'll read, I'll catch up on reading. But when you don't have basic needs met, you're scared. And I was never that scared in my life before. Like I've never been without heat or power. I lived in the Northeast. It snowed all the time. We were used to that. But so that was just, so it was almost like that was just not even icing on the cake, but it was just the last straw. It felt like last year when we didn't have power, because it was already a year of uncertainty. So I think just in general, experiencing emotions that I've never experienced before. I don't think I've ever been that full of fear, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah. And that anxiety throughout the year for all those different things can definitely take its toll. But you made a good point about our dependency on the basic necessities, like health, for example. I mean, that we were leaning on the things that are big. It was a really interesting environment, and obviously we're not 100% out of it yet, but yeah, between the random freeze, and now we're almost in January and it's 80 degrees outside, and then of course the health side of things. Yeah, it's definitely been interesting.
So thinking along those lines, like what lesson then, like what did 21 tell you, and then in line with that question, like what do we wish we knew, or what would we tell the next group of people going through a global pandemic? If we could think 100 years from now, what would we want them to know? What was a lesson that you feel like you learned in this?
I think in general, we have to look for early signals of things. And we have to be prepared for obviously the pandemic came fast, right? I think there were some early signals, January, February. And of course, we can't be completely predictive on exactly what's going to happen, but right now there's some other early signals happening. And what are we doing to address those? And I know before we started the podcast, you had mentioned the teachers that are in general leaving, right? It's like mass exodus of teachers leaving public education. And then you have, we had probably the worst bond election in 10 years this year. More and more bonds were rejected. I just did a poll on social media because I was floating the idea of a documentary on public education in 2022. And some of the comments that have been people that responded to it, there's a lot of animosity or just frustration with, there was corruption mentioned, there was managing of finances mentioned, and obviously everybody doesn't feel this way, but there are undertones there that need to be addressed. And I've sat in some meetings with educational leaders, and in some cases there's a us versus them mindset. One phrase that was used was, "This is a war," and it's not a war. It's a service. In my mind, public education is about serving the community. It's about being there for the community. And if there's a differing of opinion, it can't be a fight. It's got to be an understanding. It's got to be a conversation. And because who are they fighting for? It's are you fighting for the government? Or are you fighting for the community? Or are you fighting for the students? And so I think to circle back to your original question, just looking at those things through the right perspective and identifying things early and having that sense of urgency to act fast and be decisive, I guess.
Gosh, there's so much to unpack with that. I feel like to address the idea of the teachers leaving, when there is a pandemic or a big crisis, I think it is a chance to pivot, and it is a chance to say, like, was this working? Did I like this anyway? I think some of us liked working from home and some of us didn't. And then I think employers are now wondering, how can we meet the needs of, making things more, well, like they're doing things. I think some people are doing things to say, well, you can work from home part-time, or you can do this to make things more, I can't think the word right now, but make it doable, accessible. Yeah. Because we had a taste of being able to work from home. But I think that you mentioned the word war. We use that word, actually, some school board trustees that see that there is a battle, that people don't want public ed, and they're fighting against public ed and sending monies to charters that should be kept, at the local level for schools. So I think it's interesting that you see it and notice that word war, and that is not good. And you're like, it needs to be an understanding. And I love that. This is why it's so fun to do this podcast with you, because we come at it from different angles. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I was just thinking of like funny things that I would say to people, but I'll go serious after I do funny. So I'm going to say some funny things. I would tell that a young woman, or a woman that has maybe colors her hair or has gets her bangs cut, to grow her bangs out if there's a global pandemic, and to get a puppy. If I could go back and see that I would have been home for an entire year, I would have got a puppy. I hope my husband's not listening to this episode, but if there's ever a time where I'm going to be home for a long period of time, I'm getting another puppy. But I think I really like what you said, watch the warning signs. There are things that we knew about our world that before this. As Americans, we were all working too hard. We're just stressed out. People were just stressed out. And so, there were some warning signs. Right before the pandemic, I wasn't feeling well, and it was stress. I thought it was something else, and it ended up being stress. That was how I entered the pandemic, was kind of in a stressful situation. Then my son got cancer. And it just was one health battle in our family after another in the whole year. So I think what I learned, and my lesson would be, is to just honor yourself in this. I'm using the word deference this year, of just like respecting yourself and respecting, just kind of backing off and humbly respecting our own bodies and our own, our society. I think we were going at things too hard. And I think this was just a warning sign for all of us to slow down a bit, really take time to think through things, but also be willing to pivot and let go of things. What was really important. So when we didn't have power all day, but we had it for 1 hour, what did we do in that hour? I would boil water, or make sure the dogs were warm, and my kids were old enough to take care of themselves. But we have people in this country that their kids were not old enough to. You have little kids. So it's got to be scary. It was scary. So I think just really honoring ourselves and slowing down a bit is what I would say.
Yeah, it's that's very important, because I mean, I think it ties back to the necessities that we mentioned before, as
Mm.
far as honoring yourself. Like, what are your basic needs that you need to keep in mind? It's are we focused on the right things? And
Mhm.
yeah.
So I have a fun question. So do you have any, like, we just this is the end of 2021. Do you have like things that you do every year on your holiday break, or things with your families? Maybe not traditions like celebration, but any like things you always do over the holiday, or do you do that? Get buy a new planner and put out all your appointments for the year? What do you have anything that you do over the holiday break?
Well, and you mentioned some of yours, so I think yours are much better than mine. So tune in, listen up for Corinne's. Corinne's are better than mine, but uh, mine, I guess I got to recover from all the bad food or tasty food from Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, and so got to get back on that. I mean, I work out pretty regular, but that the diet definitely, or the yeah, I need to get back to eating better than I have over the past couple months. So that's important. And then as far as goals go, I kind of reflect on the previous year, what went well, what didn't go well, what do I want to improve on in 2022. And so it's pretty boring what I do, you know.
Oh, no. Well, so every year, I think this goes back into a lesson learned from 2021. Every year at the holiday break, I would take a baking soda bowl, baking soda and water, maybe lemon juice or something, and take a toothbrush and scrub my grout. And I would just take like start at one spot of my house. I have tile on most of the house, and it was just this way of I guess just like getting back. It's kind of sounds strange, but I would put blast music and just get back to the basics and really take care of my house. That felt like, for me, like my foundation is so important, and taking care of where my feet are. I've always loved clean floors, and that's just something that no matter what, like my floors are clean in my house. And that partly goes back to the fact that I had 6 babies crawling around floors all the time. And so the floor was a very important part of my life. But I think this year I realized, like, why do I do that? It doesn't have to be done. Um, so I think letting go of some of those maybe things that I thought, well, this has to be done. I have to do this, which sounds kind of silly, um, but I always, so there's some fun ones I do. I love to read the same book every year. It's Man's Search for Meaning from Viktor Frankl. And it's so fun because this is a tiny little book, but I spent a summer in Germany after my sophomore year of college, the first time I was in college back in the 90s. And I when I was in one of the concentration camps, it changed. I really feel like that moment in time changed my life. And I just decided from that point on, I was going to make sure I always self-reflected, always challenged myself, always just pushed myself, like you're saying, reflect on the goals from the year before. So this book is something I try to read every year. Sometimes I'll read it before I go to bed and it falls behind my bed, which kind of goes back to like the cleaning the floors all the time, because then I try to clean behind things and do all those like extra chores that you just put off for the whole entire year. So that's one thing I do. I'm a planner person, so I definitely pull out my new planner and put all my appointments in that I know of for the year. I'm not a sticker planner person, but this year I went ahead and bought some stickers just for the heck of it, because I just feel like I need some joy in 2022 and I need to approach it a little differently. So I think that's my new space, is to not look to my old ways and not be so stuck in thinking that something has to be a certain way, which kind of goes along with starting this podcast with you. I always want to have everything figured out before I start and have like the whole year plan, and that just doesn't work. So this holiday break has been good for me. This is the first time I've been on the computer the whole time, so I'm thankful for that.
Wow.
Yeah, I purposely stayed up. I looked one day to look at my grades for SMU. I had to look at those grades. Happy with them. So that's the only time I've been on the computer.
That's awesome. And for those of y'all that don't know, Corinne's getting her doctorate from SMU, and
Mhm.
I don't know how you do it with everything between the school board and your job and all your kids. And yeah, it's that's awesome. It's an inspiration, definitely.
Well, thank you. It's been great. Well, thinking along those lines of studying and books and things like that, are there books or podcasts other than ours of 2021? Some books or podcasts, something that inspired you in 2021?
Great question. Yeah, so one thing I study quite a bit is business acquisitions, and so mine are boring business books. So I read those all the time, and marketing. I'm definitely interested in marketing, and I do help some people with some of their marketing efforts, and it's something I do on the side for fun. And marketing and acquisitions is something I'm excited about, and outside of helping public education and try to get funding to them, that's what I spend my time trying to learn and help others in that area. So inspiring books. I'm actually reading some copywriting books from like the 1950s, like I think it's 1950s, like Eugene Schwartz and some of the legends in marketing. So reading that, and yeah, so just that's what I do for fun, and those are the books I read. I forgot to mention a book, the Bob books. So my 5-year-old daughter, she just turned 5 not too long ago. We are reading the Bob books, so she's learning.
What are they? I don't know about them.
They're these little just small books for kids where they learn one word at a time. It was late last night. We were going through them. I was probably getting too frustrated, but yeah,
Aww.
like they'll have some words that are kind of similar, like mitt and sit and
How great.
yeah.
I remember those days. I think that's how I can do a lot now, is that when I had all those kids at home and was just exhausted. Now I'm not taking care of babies, so I think that's why I can do so much now. Well, my favorite books this year, one of them is Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes. And I don't watch the shows that she puts out. I don't get to watch a lot of TV, but I love this book, Year of Yes. So if you are listening to this podcast and you want to be encouraged, I listen to them on Audible, but I also bought them. So I listen to books on Audible a lot. I would say probably every day I listen to a couple hours because I drive to work, and so I'm always listening to a book. But then if I really like the book, because there's something that the author says that I'm like, I have to use that in a speech someday, or use that, then I go get the book in person too. But I think at some point this year, I read so much for SMU, and I read so much for other roles that I think I wanted to stop trying to save the world on my own. Like it just felt like I was just tired. So I started reading some other books that this one's called League of Wives, and it's all about the untold story of women who took on the US government to bring their husbands home. And so they're the POW wives, and Heath Lee wrote this book. But one of my friends is a school board member. I was a school board member. Her dad was overseas, and so to know the story of my friend Paige and her dad, so that book has been really helpful to me to see how other women have navigated difficult situations. I think that's kind of the theme that I love to learn about, how women have made it through history. But the other one is Women with Silver Wings, and this one is all about the inspiring true story of women Air Force service pilots in World War II. And so that has just been really inspiring to me this last year. I listened to both of them. Or Women with Silver Wings, I listened to probably 3 times already on Audible. It's just so amazing to hear the stories. But I think what's interesting about this book, The Women with Silver Wings, is a lot of those women didn't even tell anyone they did this. Once they did that part of their life, that chapter was over, and they became women that had babies later, so they became mothers. There were all kinds of people in their circle that didn't know that part about their history. And so I think that was fascinating. And I wonder, sometimes, I guess this comes back to our parenting, some of the things that you have accomplished. Your girls get to see a certain part of your world, and my kids get to see a certain part of mine. But I think the journals, so that's a kind of a question I was going to ask you. Do you journal? Because I wonder what parts of stories that people need to know later that we're experiencing now. So do you journal?
I don't know if it classifies as journaling like you're describing. I have a daily planner that I have my goals, and then I have a reflection at the end. Oh, also what I'm grateful for is listing. It's actually a planner I designed. Um, it'll be on Amazon pretty soon. So just shameless plug there. But
I need to
anyways,
know about that because I might want to design a planner with you too.
yeah. So I had this one planner I was using, but I didn't really. There were some good parts about it, and some that I was like, I don't really need that. So I redesigned one. And if you were to look at my office right now, I have boxes of planners. So it's a planner focused. Has goals, quarterly goals, monthly goals, daily goals, yearly goals, 5-year goals, and then it also each day it has a chart where you categorize, you prioritize what's important tasks for that day, and then also what you're grateful for, what went well that day, what you want to do better tomorrow. So it's kind of like journaling, but it's
Yeah. Well, and it is. So that's kind of what I've done. I've used the same size planner for 30 years. So when I first was at college the first time in the 90s, I got a planner and I was just kept refilling that for literally 30 years. I've used that. This is the first year I've gone to a larger planner. Um, I think another thing that I did differently is that I think I was afraid to write down like all my goals and dreams, and I was afraid to journal. Like I was afraid to tell maybe the world that this day was terrible. Like today I wanted to quit. I think I was afraid to put some of that on paper. So I think kind of in line with the fears of last year, I think it finally became almost acceptable for us to talk about the fact that the year stunk, like we didn't like the year and it was hard. So but in that I've always been a positive person. So I was always writing positive things, but I think that's this is the first time I've had a bigger planner, but I'm interested in seeing yours because none of the planners that I've ever used really meet my goals and needs. One of them will have Saturday and Sunday small, and it gives a lot of space Monday through Friday. Well, my weekends are packed, not just like social things. It's mostly doing all that school work for SMU or school board work and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd love to see your planner. That would be fun to think about designing a planner. Maybe we'll have one that goes from our podcast. Who knows?
public education planner, right?
Yeah, or just like people who do too much planner.
Right.
A planner for people who are trying to change the world, make a positive impact. Well, that's great. I can't wait to see that. Um,
They do
so,
help though, as far as like um
and you keep them though, right? You keep them.
yeah. They do help as far as keeping track of what your goals are. If not, if you don't control where you're going, somebody else is going to
Mm-hmm.
take your time for whatever they're pursuing. So you got to kind of definitely take control of your time and where you spend your efforts. For me, it really helps. But on the journaling side, you mentioned fear a second ago, and one thing that's helped me, it's not something I do on a regular basis, but occasionally if I'm just overwhelmed with everything going on and fear, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, I'll make a list of all the fears that I have, and then like how to address those fears, or why do I feel those fears, and what's worst case scenario, because a lot of times we have fears that just they're just not they're not worth having. There's no point to them. It's just I'm trying to remember what there was something I heard. I think it was on social media. It was a video that I heard. It was like a motivational thing, and the person that talking said, we're basically afraid of our imagination because we're afraid of things that haven't happened, and we're just imagining that they would happen. So we're basically afraid of things that don't exist, and versus focusing on right now, what's really going on that's right in front of our face right now, and not something that we imagine, because we can imagine all these different scenarios and create all this fear and anxiety, and the odds of a lot of those happening are probably wouldn't happen. And even if they did happen, it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal.
I love that. I'm going to do that this year. Right. Like when I'm noticing that when I'm overwhelmed, I think when I get overwhelmed, that's when I go to my garden. I just go outside and I just take a book. I don't take my phone, and I just try to just literally chill out and just sit and let, literally the flowers and the wind and the nature just kind of calm me. So when I come right home from something and I go right to the garden. Sometimes I'll put a bathing suit on and we don't have a pool. That's my husband's cue. Like, she's putting her bathing suit on. She's going outside to sit in the sun. Like, something's not right. Give her some time. But I love just writing them down and literally addressing them. Like, what's the worst case scenario? Like, if this happens, what really is what's the true outcome of this? And will I still be on this planet? And probably 99% of them would be yes. I love that, because I did something different yesterday. I wrote down all the things I need to do, like, just the next couple of days. And instead of making a to-do list, I put to crush. Like, these are the things I get to crush, or this is how I get to experience the day. Because I think the simple words like to do, that was important, at one point, to say, oh, here, make a to-do list. But my to-do list never ends, because it just none of our lists are going to ever end if we get to keep living. We're going to have a doctor's appointment, or we're going to get to take someone somewhere, we're going to get to do. But I think approaching those lists with a different mindset is where I'm at this next year. So thanks for sharing that tip.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off that a little bit. So there was like this neuroscientist that I listened to at one point. He was talking about like every hour doing a reflection of how you feel. Like, so if, let's say there's a certain point, I don't know if you want to do it every hour, but if, let's say there's a certain point you're feeling this like fear, anxiety, or whatever it is, or anger or whatever, like, do a quick self-reflection. Like, why do I feel this way? Oh, I had this thought about that. And, so you can kind of like understand yourself a little bit better of why do you feel that way? And is that feeling really justified? And if it's not, then change your state, I guess. But yeah, I think it's helpful to do that occasionally as well. But
yeah, that's really great. Well, so do you have we were thinking about like what our tips would be if we had to ever tell someone to go through a global pandemic again. But what about thoughts and literal prayers that we have for public ed over the next year? I know I'm really thankful that we have a faith-based sponsor with Ideal Impact. They sponsored our podcast. We started in April. I don't know if you know our date. I looked back at my planner. We started April 16th, I think was our first episode, I think. And so I'm so thankful for that. I don't talk about my faith very often. I work in a public space, and I think I love the fact that all faiths can be supported in our state and recognized, and we honor everyone. So that's important to me. But I do pray for public ed, and when our vice president of our board will text me every now and then when she's running, she runs, and that's when she prays, and she'll text me something after she's done praying, and it's just so sweet. So what are some of the prayers that you have for teachers? We mentioned them, public ed leaders, people like me that are board members, and superintendents, the people that are governing and leading, and our students. Do you have some like 3 specific prayers or thoughts for them?
yeah, and I really think it applies to public education. I mean, at the end of the day, public education, they're just people, and believe it or not, they're people, right? So I think it applies to society. I think it applies to the community, and just prayers for empathy, for understanding of others, and objectivity. Really, I know in public education, you're not supposed to have religion in education. You're not supposed to have, certain types of beliefs, but they're there, whether you want to call them religion or beliefs, they are there. And I think that's part of some of the issues that are happening right now in society related, that us versus them mentality ties back to being passionate about something you believe and not being open to listening and empathizing with other people. And so at the end of the day, a religion in my mind is just a way to communicate with other people. It's a belief, but it's also how you interact with people. And everybody has a mindset or a belief of how they interact with different people, and it's including those that work for public education. But at the same time, people in public education have to empathize with the community, and people that are saying things that they don't like to hear. They have to empathize and understand, why are they saying that? Where are they coming from? And also the community has to listen to those in public education and understand where they're coming from. And so there has to be that empathy there. So I pray that there's empathy and understanding other people's perspective and where they're coming from. Why are they saying the things they say? And what are some ways that people can work together to get past it and make it even better, regardless of your beliefs? And I think that's where the objectivity comes in, is like, if you believe something, that is great, but you still have to listen to other people. You can't just say, I'm not going to listen to, especially in public education, because in public education, it's a melting pot. You have all these different, there's a lot of talk about like race and gender and that sort of thing, but also there's a lot of different beliefs in public education, different perspectives on things. And so I pray for empathy and objectivity, not only for public education, but for the community, society. That's right.
I love that. That's beautiful. Empathy and objectivity. I think I pray for, I thought when I asked to do this podcast with you, this episode, we're talking kind of just together. I was thinking what my 3 prayers are. So I am kind of more specific, because I love how I love yours. I love yours. It's beautiful. I think for me, I'm praying specifically for people like me who are board members across the state. We do have about 7,000 board members in the state of Texas. We have about 1,200 public schools, or a little bit more than that. And so we're the largest elected group of officials in the state of Texas. We're not paid, but we're there. I pray for unity, for us to be objective, like you're saying, and have empathy. But I also pray for them to be innovative and more bold. So I think there's all kinds of people being bold right now, but I pray that the people who are the kind people who are doing this for the right reasons will become more bold and speak up for what's right for students. But then I think for teachers, my prayer is just, I want to keep praying for strength for them, but at some point, strength just isn't enough when you're asking them to do something that's almost impossible. So I pray for some kind of relief. And when I think of, like, you keep mentioning the word community, I was thinking, like, what would it be? Because just praying for people, when people are struggling, I prayed for you, that can be seen as, I need you to do something for me. Like, what can you do? But I think districts are, because you mentioned earlier, they're so different. What way can people stand up for the teachers, and what does that look like? And so I think you have to examine your own heart. What does it look like for as a parent in your community, or as a community business person? Like, how can you stand up for the teachers? For some people, it might be giving more money so that they don't have to spend their own money this year on the supplies they normally would buy. For other communities, it could be showing up for things. I don't know. I'm just kind of guessing, but I think it's different across the state. But what do our teachers need? So I pray that we will meet some of those needs for our teachers. And I think specifically for our students, I pray for them to have an understanding that this crazy thing that just happened to them doesn't harm them in an unjust way, like in ways that we can't recover from. I feel like I see in some kids' eyes this lack of hope. It's just there's just this strange thing I'm seeing in some students right now and in people. And I think some of it goes back to, and this is not just a prayer, but this is a kind of an understanding that they spent more time on TikTok probably last year and some of those apps, learning from those apps, than they did from learning from people like you and I and their parents. I mean, we were all so stressed last year. And so I pray that students can recover from that, because while we just said we need more innovation and we need technology, they need time in laps, like what you're doing with your daughter last night, sitting on their daddy's lap, reading a book. They need time on the floor building Legos, and then older students need time playing a board game. They need that. We need that social interaction. We're crushed without it as humans. So I pray that there's something that can change kind of in their mind, that maybe they can it's hard for a kid to know this was not permanent, but it's not over yet. So I don't really know what the right word is, but I definitely have a burden for our students, that they can can get that connection. So I think that comes from teachers. So often we have teachers become other mothers and other fathers for students. And so that's a hard thing. But my final thing would be just, I guess, for everyone, every adult, that they would come back to kind of what your prayer is, just to have an understanding and to slow down and listen and not be so quick to come in with, with their answer, and just see with some humility, is there something I'm missing? Could I have been wrong as an adult? And be willing to pivot. So I think those are my prayers. Those are kind of, they sound like downers, but.
No, I think they're really good, and they're great actually. And one, you mentioned a word that I think connects some of them together, and that's hope. And it ties back to that mindset issue you were talking about earlier. Just, I don't know, issues the right word, but as far as approaching it to crush it versus just a to-do list, right? You show up enthusiastic and ready to go and ready to innovate, but I think a lot of that ties back to hope. If you're hopeful for what could happen and the possibilities, you're definitely more motivated to show up with that level of motivation and innovation to make it happen. So, well, I guess we should probably wrap things up here. Just wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. They've provided over $1.5 billion to public education and ministries. They only work with public education ministries in Texas. And so exciting there. I think we're approaching, Ideal Impact's approaching 20% of districts in Texas so far have worked with them.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's really growing. So it's pretty exciting what they have going on, and they're using technology to do it. They're not using the government. They're not using taxpayers' money to provide this funding. It's definitely benefits a lot more people than just public education. So thank you, Ideal Impact. Thank you, Corinne. Corinne, any last thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, I think we have just should let our guests know we have some really fun things planned for the new year. We're going to have a happy hour with our last year's guests and kind of bring them back and see like what they might want to share. So that's going to be exciting. We talked about doing some mastermind things. So we've got some really great things happening. Now I'm interested in maybe having a planner that's for people who do too much that we create. We definitely are going to have some amazing guests in 2022. And I'm thankful for you, Gary. Thanks for taking this risk with me and kind of encouraging me along to take these risks to do this. And I'm really thankful for you, and thank you, Ideal Impact. I heard we might be able to have some people from Ideal Impact on next year. And I would love that. I'd love to get to know how, I think, so often I tend to just focus on how education works, and I don't understand how the business side connects. And so I'm interested in learning more about that and learning along with you.
Very exciting. And thank you, Corinne. Looking forward to 2022. And for those of y'all that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast. Thank you.